Mic check 1 2 1 2. It's the Y2K collector. And it was Christmas 1992. I'll never forget it. That summer, we had spent the entire summer in Jamaica with some friends and family. And I remembered that year that Nobody Beats the Wiz and no, for those of you who don't know, Nobody Beats the Wiz was an electronics store. It was kind of like the Best Buy before Best Buy. See, back in the early 90s, before all of the smaller businesses kind of formed into one large business, there used to be some competition in the electronics and gaming space. You had stores like Nobody Beats the Wiz, Radio Shack, Circuit City. You had a number of different stores that would sell video games. Even though they weren't necessarily strictly video game stores, they sold a lot of the big box video games. And Nobody Beats the Wiz was running this crazy sale on the Sega Genesis. And I remembered pretty much that entire fall, every time we would go into Nobody Beats the Wiz, I would always stare at the display panel. My father was a big electronics guy. He was big into turntables and receivers and cassette tapes. And if you grew up in the 90s, you probably had a family member who had the whole setup. It was like a tower of different audio equipment. Like one level, like the top level would be the turntable. Then the second level would be the cassette tape player. Then you'd have a smaller panel for like CDs. Then you'd have another panel for like the receiver and the mixer. And all of that would feed out to two humongous speakers that would kick out some amazing sound. As a matter of fact, now that I think about it, you can't get that type of sound anymore, but I'm digressing. My father always used to go into Nobody's Beats the Wiz to look at just the latest turntables and look at the latest records, because he was big into records. He wasn't really into the CD thing yet. And while he was looking at records, I would sneak away and go look at the video games. And that entire fall of 1992, I was praying that somehow I could swindle my parents into getting me a Sega Genesis. And my parents were foreigners, man. Not foreigners, but they weren't born here. You know, and whenever you have parents who come to America from another country, they look at this as a land of opportunity, most of them. So, you know, they're very school driven. They want you to focus on your grades, and they're very work driven. You know, there's this common saying, it's a running joke, at least here on the East Coast, that Jamaicans will have like 5 jobs. Well, we were that type of a family. And so whenever I brought up the idea of video games to my parents, it was immediately disregarded. My parents were not huge fans of video games. So I knew that getting a Sega Genesis the Christmas of 92 was going to be a real long shot, because I just knew they weren't for it. But I figured if I started henpecking them from fall, I would henpeck them enough to at least get me the console and one game. Because back then, they had a bundle with the Sega Genesis where you could get Altered Beast included in it. And so I remember that entire fall, I just kept, every time I would just say, hey, can I get this? I would ask for it over and over and over again. And, you know, my parents they would give me like a soft no. They would give me enough of a yes for me to stop asking in the moment. But deep down inside, they knew it was going to be an ultimate no. And so Christmas came around. It was getting closer and closer to Christmas. And my parents were the types of parents who kept your hopes up to the last minute. And then like on the day of, they just dashed your dreams to the side. And so I remember it was getting closer and closer, and it was about Christmas Eve. And I still hadn't seen any signs that either of my parents got the Sega Genesis. I was really like looking for it. Like, where's the Sega Genesis at? Why don't we have it yet? And I was even kind of looking around the house, like trying to see if there was a Sega Genesis hiding somewhere, and there wasn't one. And so I remember like the day before Christmas in 92, my mom came home and she gave me a Hess truck. For those of you who don't know, the Hess truck is like a classic. It's like a toy car. It's like a toy truck from the Hess gas stations. And they even have the commercial, you know, the Hess truck's back and it's better than ever. Like, that's been around for decades. And that was the gift that I would get Like if I got a Hess truck, I kind of knew it was going to be an abysmal Christmas because that was going to be my Christmas gift from both of my parents. And I remember the day before Christmas, my mom hooked me up with a Hess truck. I think that might have been, I don't know if that was the one that came with the helicopter on the back. I don't think the helicopter came that year. That was still too early. And so I had my little Hess truck, and I was a little burnt because I knew Christmas Day was going to be pretty much spent staring at the Yule log. You know, there was this TV channel where you could just put it on TV and it would just show a picture of a Yule log burning all day. And it would be a Yule logs and the music. And I guess the good thing is that my mom would cook. And, you know, even though I was sad about the Sega and everything, I was still glad that my parents were home and my mom was cooking and, you know, my family was going to be together. Well, just when I thought everything, when it was over, just when I thought it was going to be just an abysmal Christmas, I remember my brother, he rushes into the house real fast too. Like I had an older brother at the time, and he comes rushing into the house real quick, goes rushing into the room and goes straight to the closet and just stuffs this huge bag into the top of the closet and then just starts like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I remember, you know, he was just kind of like incognito the whole afternoon, just kind of chilled out. I remember that afternoon, I think we watched Video Music Box. For those of you who don't know, Video Music Box was like a channel that played like the latest music videos. That was way before like TRL, way before like, you know, like all the shows, like before MTV really took over. Video Music Box was the, at least on the East Coast, that's what we watched. And I just remember like once like everything settled down and everyone like started going to bed, I shared a room with my brother. I remember like later on that night, he goes back up into the closet, pulls out this bag, and out of the bag, it's like as he's pulling the box out of the bag, it's like I could see the light shining through the bag. And I could hear like angelic voices, right? And he pulls out this Sega Genesis high definition console out the bag, and I'm just like blown away. I'm like, this dude has one. Like, how does he have one? And he has one. And I remember he pulls it out, and he thought I was asleep. I pop up, and immediately he gives me the finger to the lips. He's like, shh, don't make a sound, because he doesn't want to wake anyone up. And he pulls it out, and we had like a little small, like, I can't remember what type of TV it was. I think it was like a little small Sony TV at the time. It was like one of our first color TVs, because the TV we had before that was like, it was one of those box TVs. It was like black and white. And we had just upgraded to like this Sony. It was like a small, like 16-inch, like color TV. And he pulls out the Sega and he opens up the box and he gets to work. He starts working on putting it all together, setting it all up. Because in our house, like I said, we weren't video game centric. So even if you did have we're gonna play the video game, like once you were done playing the video game, you had to like pack it away, like put it back in the box and pack it away. Like it wasn't like one of those homes where you could like keep the video games out. That's just how my house was. Maybe your house was different. And so he pulls it out, he hooks it all up, and one of the first games he pulls out is Streets of Rage. I'll never forget it. He pulls out Streets of Rage, and I'll never forget when that music just kicks in. Ba, da, da, da. You know, it's like gives you that little eerie kind of old school 90s vibe. And at the time, I was a little burnt because he didn't have two controllers at the time. So he only had one controller, and he got to going. And I didn't get to play that night. I wish the story ended with me and my brother staying up all night until 3 a.m. playing Sega Genesis. We didn't get to play that night. But I did get to watch him play Streets of Rage, Altered Beast, Spider-Man, and then a few days later, he got Ghouls and Ghosts. And I remember eventually he did get another controller, and I was able to play with him. But just that night, I remember feeling so excited that I actually had a Sega Genesis in my house. And even though I couldn't play, like I was at least able to watch my brother play it. And I was close to it. Like I could at least touch it. Like I was close, I was within like, reach of it. And I remember it just feeling like a console that was just like so beyond my reach. And the fact that he had one in the house just left a memorable impression on me. And Christmas of 92 will always be special for that reason. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I will always have a Sega Genesis collection, just because of what it meant for me in my childhood. Because for the next few years, we killed that Sega Genesis. I mean, we played it nonstop. Streets of Rage, Altered Beast, Ghouls and Ghosts, Sonic the Hedgehog, you name it, we played it. And it just brings back very fond memories of just a more simple time. A simple time in life. The 90s were rough. Like, don't get me wrong. The 90s were really rough. And if you grew up in the 90s, you know it was rough. Drugs, gang violence, war, just a lot. The 90s was riddled with a lot of pain. But there was also a lot of good times in the 90s. And video games was definitely a huge part of the 90s for me. And so here we are, over 30 years later, and I still got my Sega, and I can't wait to bring this up on Christmas Day and rock out. Probably not with this Sega Genesis, because this one's a little bit too old, but I'll be able to connect the Mini a lot easier to the HDMI and get this going with my daughter, so we can relive some of those moments from the 90s. And hit the camera. But definitely going to be playing some Sega Genesis with the kiddos, just to kind of relive some of those memories and enjoy some of those good times. And even if you don't have like an original Sega Genesis, the Mini is definitely a great way to experience some really classic games. But I'll never forget 92, man. 92 was a year to remember. Let me know down in the comments, what was your favorite video game Christmas memory? Let me know if you have any Christmas stories. And I'll catch you in the next video, man. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.